Let me start by acknowledging that the staff, board, and artists of Jack Straw Cultural Center are living, creating, working, and playing on the traditional land of the First People of Seattle and the Salish Sea, and we honor them and the land itself with deep gratitude. We also want to acknowledge the funders that make the program and the many other programs that happen here at Jack Straw happen. The Youth District Partnership, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, For Culture, Washington State Arts Commission, the National Endowment for the Arts, Arts Fund, Lester and Phillips Epstein Foundation, and our individual contributors for their support of the Jack Straw Writers Program, and like I said, our other writing residencies. So welcome again. It's lovely to be here. I can't wait to hear the readers tonight, and I will turn it over to this year's curator, Priscilla Long.
Thank you, Claudia. Claudia Castro Luna is the poet who wrote this really profound and beautiful book that just came out, well, last year it came out, Cipota Under the Moon. And so, thank you. And thank you to the Jack Straw Cultural Center and Joan Rabinowitz and Levi Fuller for creating this dynamic and nurturing vortex of the arts, really. And so now, the first reader is Steve Griggs. Steve Griggs is a jazz musician. I should say he's an amazing jazz musician and a writer who brings his deep knowledge of the musical history of Seattle, which is a lot of musical history, as you may know, to the page. Steve is an award-winning composer, producer, performer, and publisher. He has 6 jazz recordings of his music on his independent label, Hip City Music. His writing about music has been published all over the place, including Earshot Jazz, Raven Chronicles, and the Seattle Times. So please welcome Steve Griggs.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Really honored. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for Jack Straw. They've been supporting a great partner for a lot of my music projects, which I recorded in this room. So it's great to be back here with all of you. I'm going to read my piece from the anthology. It's a little experiment for me doing an essay. I brought a little bit of my memoir in. But I found myself in recent days musing on the legacy of recorded music in Seattle. And so it prompted this question: how long should music last? Time beautified is music. Time beautified is music, suggested musicologist Isaac Rice in the late 1800s. Time and beauty weave a sound with unity and continuity, euphony. Music, ephemeral, evanescent, fleeting, fugacious, an invisible field of feelings like gravity, magnetism, quantum mechanics, and morphogenetics. Can it last? How long? Can I make it last longer? First, consider the quantifiable. A flute made of bear bone found in a cave was crafted 60,000 years ago. A 4,000-year-old Sumerian clay tablet contained music notation. A marble column in Turkey from the 1st century AD marked a woman's grave with an inscription of musical notation and lyrics that read, "While you live, shine. Have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time demands its toll." The toll of time. There was a time when the sound of a bell could be heard only when struck, and then remembered silently. Until on Monday, January 26, 1857, a Parisian named Edouard Leon Scott cleverly asked in a design application to the French Academy, and I quote, "Can it be hoped that the day is near when the musical phrase escaped from the singer's lips will be written by itself, and as if without the musician's knowledge, on a docile paper, and leave an imperishable trace of those fugitive melodies which the memory can no longer find when it seeks them?" His invention, the phonautograph, a device which scribbled on a piece of moving paper the sound wave present. The present sound became available to the future as an image transcribed on paper, not just notation to be interpreted by a performer. Sung melodies were no longer fugitive. Memory could count on an imperishable reproduction in print. 20 years later, another Parisian, Charles Cros, imagined a paleophone, a device to inscribe sound wave oscillations on a rotating cylinder, trumped by Thomas Edison's phonograph prototype a year later, which used wax-coated cylinder to record and play back "Mary Had a Little Lamb." Everywhere that music went, a flock of recordings was sure to follow. Now music, beautified time, could live beyond a moment, place, source of creation, transforming any future moment desired with captured sonic sculptures. Music recorded on wax cylinders was sold commercially, and forevermore, musicians referred to recording as making wax. An early version of commercial cylinder recordings was sold in cans, coining the phrase canned music. Early record players were sold in furniture stores and moved records into most households by 1920. 30 million records were sold in 1910 alone. Subsequent technology employing electrons for microphones and speakers, magnetic particles for audio tape, radio waves for wireless transmission, laser beams for compact discs, and silicon circuits for iPods, iPads, iPhones merely modified the convenience, length, fidelity, fungibility of recorded reproductions. How long is music on recordings these days? Well, according to the website Big Time Musicians, the average length of a pop song is 3.5 minutes. Rap, just under 4. Rock, 4.25. R&B, just over 4.5. So soft-boiled eggs and hard rock have time in common. But what makes some music feel better? In the case of jazz, it is a matter of subtle timing, a slight delay in synchronization between musicians. People report that the small delay makes music swing harder. The exact amount of time? A theoretical physicist named Theo Geisel collected data that points to 30 milliseconds. Just that little shift changes the sound from mechanical to human, from stiff to soulful, from tight to right. The drummer's right hand stick on the wide ride cymbal splang dang-a-lang links the low bass thump from fingers pulling gut strings, setting a rock steady beat hipper than any metronome. The other musicians hold back their notes to challenge the beat, weave awake, surprise the sound. Jazz synchronizes a handful of musicians, but how can a whole orchestra traverse time together? The baton is not a mechanical device like a second hand on a watch, but it can shepherd a large flock of musicians forward through a score, a magic wand that points, parries, and pirouettes. I recalled a conducting masterclass held one morning at Carnegie Hall by French conductor Pierre Boulez. In the darkened theater, dotted with conductors, scores for La Mer by French composer Claude Debussy open on their laps, a young conductor lifted his baton in front of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Down it came for beat 1 and snapped to the right for beat 2. The opening strain of musical depiction of the ocean oozed into the air. "Stop!" cried Boulez. The baton slowly sank to the stop beside the student's leg. The sea of sound ceased. You must give the orchestra the first beat, then wait. A silence filled the hall. Wait until the orchestra gives you back the sound of the first beat. Then you can give them the second beat. Soft clicking of bows on music stands signaled approval of the assembled performers. Watch. Boulez traded places with the student on the podium. With no baton, Boulez lifted his hand into the air. Musicians raised their instruments to playing position. Boulez's right hand came down and bounced slightly. A moment later, the orchestra swelled. Boulez lifted his hand, and down it came again. The musical sea rose, waves lifting waves. Then Boulez waved his hand, silencing the sound. Lesson delivered, Boulez sensed an opportunity for deeper insight. He lifted his bare hands and began to sing. His hands, floating, undulating, splashing, became the oceanic music, while his voice sang the orchestral parts using solfège, French syllables for each pitch in the musical score. French music, French conductor, French vocal syllables. Voila. There is an Italian word important for orchestral synchronization, rubato, or robbed, literally stealing a little time from this or that beat and giving a bit more to another. The music stretches and shrinks over a steady pulse to add emotional color at the minute level of feelings below the conscious mind. Subtle indeed. These issues of timing control performance in the present, but what of recordings made to capture these subtleties? Recordings of feelings in sound. I remembered a visit to San Francisco. While ordering coffee in a Haight-Ashbury cafe, a recording of rhythmic acoustic guitar beckoned in the background, part samba, part sax, part bossa nova, smooth, serene, seductive. Soon, a male voice singing in Portuguese entered, João Gilberto, like a hum, a hymn, hypnotic. To even say his name required my mouth to not trust my eyes and find a new dance. The opening consonant J sounds like Jaja Gabor, or the OAO form a diphthong, kind of like ow with a swallowed ending. The G has the same Jaja sound as the J, then Ilberto with a swallowed rolled R that sounds like a hint of an H. Just like music, the look on the page misses the feeling of the sound. I could not translate the Portuguese lyric, but the timing of the words tickled my ears. The words ran way ahead of the guitar accompaniment, phrases ending early, leaving room for the ticking time of the guitar, and it sounded so deliciously good. Normally, anticipation of the beat creates tension and anxiety, but Gilberto's timing did the opposite, like a trick where the barbell is a balloon. Mastery becomes mystery. The feeling was weightlessness, floating, carefree, hopeful. With the knowing wink, I realized that timing was everything. A magic portal to the palette of people's feelings. I had to have the recording. The barista showed me the CD, a self-titled reissue. I immediately sought a store and purchased a copy so I could have physical proof that alchemy was real. I could enter that feeling on demand. Just press play. But what of music recorded and not commercialized? Jam bands Grateful Dead and Phish have legions of followers who record their improvised performances and barter bootlegs like rare baseball cards. The bands create a community of caring curators. But not all musicians have large audiences, especially jazz musicians like me. And not all recordings are shared widely. For example, a Seattle saxophonist, Joe Brazil, recorded live performances in nightclubs so he could study and learn. Jim Knapp, a Seattle composer, recorded performances of his work to document his oeuvre. Jim Wilkie, a Seattle radio broadcaster of live music, recorded what he aired to review the success or shortcomings of his microphone placement. These recordings made for personal and artistic reasons, are a physical artifact of a life in music, jazz in particular, Seattle specifically. They are lightning in a bottle. Group improvisation caught on tape or computer, but without an interested descendant, headed for the landfill because they take up too much space in a dark basement. This music, this beautified time, may be stopped and silenced forever. There are gems from these doomed collections. They've been polished and published, have already won worldwide acclaim and awards. John Coltrane, A Love Supreme live in Seattle, Ahmad Jamal, Emerald City Nights, Cannonball Adderley, Swingin' in Seattle, and several more. What more can be mined and minted? What else can be heard and heralded? What lessons could be learned? I want these messages from the past to find a home, like this place, a place to survive, to last long into the future, a living room, to share their stories with us, their neighbors, nieces, nephews, now and into the next generation, at an address where this local music took its first steps and later ran full throttle out into the world. Jackson Street, a historic trunk of tolerance connecting the roots of Seattle, a waterfront landing known as Little Crossing Over Place by the indigenous Duwamish tribe, renamed Pioneer Square by the colonizers, to branches of the city's non-white residents, Asian, Pacific Islander, Jewish, Black. Musical pioneers like Jelly Roll Morton, Ray Charles, and Quincy Jones composed, improvised, and nourished themselves here because the rest of booming white Seattle kept them out. Music, beautified time, could be preserved. Necessary noise for the next of us.
That was incredibly musical. Thank you. So, the next reader is Sue Mutasib. Sue is a genderqueer author and scientist. They have been writing for 4 decades and publishing scientific articles for 3. Sue sees writing as a path to social as well as scientific change. Their stories are meant to expand perspectives while they entertain. Their debut, forgot. Their debut book. A Boy Named Sue is a memoirist collection of nonfiction stories and essays about their journey into genderqueerness. This book is engaging, erotic, artful, sensitive, and insightful. So please welcome Sue.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, and thank you, Levi, as well as our engineers, Daniel, Carlos, and Aisha, as well as our photographer, Sherwin, and all the other wonderful people who make Jack Straw what it is, and the Jack Straw Cultural Institution what it is. It's been a real honor, and especially the other writers who are in the program, most of whom are here today. Like, it's been such an honor to be part of the 2023 Jack Straw Writers Program with all of you. So the great thing about having a book called A Boy Named Sue is that invariably when people hear that, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, you know, there's a Johnny Cash song by that same name. And I'm like, you don't say. and I've never really been able to come up with a graceful or non-sarcastic response to that. But then one time there was someone there who came up with an even better response than I would have come up with. And they said, well, you know, Johnny Cash didn't write the words to that song. And does anyone know who actually wrote it? It was Shel Silverstein. So, Shel Silverstein wrote a poem called A Boy Named Sue. Then Johnny Cash made a song called A Boy Named Sue. And then Sue Mutasib, that's me, wrote a book called A Boy Named Sue. And these are all incredible works of art that you should all cherish and, like, you know, keep close to your heart and tell all your friends about. So that book was nonfiction. You know, it was a collection of stories, as Priscilla was saying, about my journey with genderqueerness. And now I'm in the business of writing fiction. And as Priscilla was saying, I'm trying to write stories about topics that are a little bit too uncomfortable to kind of talk about in our usual, or very polarizing, and I'm trying to see how we might use character as narrative to create empathy and understanding and perspective, potentially in those kinds of situations. But writing fiction does have its unique challenges, and there's a quote from the hilarious writer Gabrielle Moss that I saw last week that I think really captures it. And she said, "Novels are so great. Novels are like, I made up a little weirdo. Oh no, now he's in trouble." So here's a story about a little weirdo who gets in trouble. It's called What If? What kind of fool makes a first date for Christmas Eve? Watts knew better. He knew better, even when he made the date. December was the time of last-minute cancellations, with family and travel and gift shopping wreaking havoc on the schedules of lonely singles. By mid-December, the great flakeout had begun in earnest, and a day before Christmas, you couldn't even rely on the buses to run on time. Still, the week after would have been worse. He looked at his watch again, 8 minutes past 7. Not unreasonably late yet, but not a good sign. He had texted her from the bus at 6:45 to make sure the time still worked for her. She had said she'd arrived early, but then realized she'd left her ID at home. Entirely reasonable. Except that to minimize the chances for a no-show, he had suggested they choose a place close to where she lived. Always make it easy to say yes, he had thought to himself. But that meant she would have had plenty of time to go home and get back by now. Again, not a good sign. He looked out towards the windows facing the street, but all he could see was the dark December night and the vague reflection of his own ghost in the glass. Watts scrolled through her text messages from the last day to see what might have happened. Nothing too remarkable there, mostly just logistics on where and when to meet. Maybe a few too many emojis, though. Had he seemed overenthusiastic? He noticed that each of his texts ended with an exclamation mark, and sometimes two, while hers rarely ended with punctuation at all. Who had first suggested meeting in person? It was him. Who had suggested the date and time? Him again. Great. For a certain kind of person, avoiding the discomfort of saying no outweighed the guilt of standing up a stranger. But what kind of person would do that? Crap. This kind of person, apparently. Crap. That said, she was still within the window for plausible lateness. He had to wait until at least 7:15, or else he could end up being the asshole for not giving her enough time. Might as well make it an even 7:30. Watts looked around the bar. It was one of the new boutique cider places. Long, gleaming wooden tables under handcrafted light bulbs, stools fixed to swinging joints under the supports. No table service, just a register in front of a giant chalkboard with the available ciders and a long array of taps. He looked back at the bartender, a Seattle classic. Perfectly manicured beard, a mustache with waxed tips, and a vest of dark suiting material over a muted plaid shirt in blue and gray. The plaid felt like an homage to the neighborhood's working-class past of rugged fisherfolk, the facial hair and vest in alignment with the nouveau style of carefully curated masculinity. Bearded Vest had been pleasant enough when he rang him up. As he handed back his card, Watts couldn't help but notice the dark metal band on his finger. Must be nice this time of year, going home to a warm embrace, recounting the stories of the day, Watts muttered to himself. He imagined what story Bearded Vest might recount about him. It's always sad this close to the holidays. You see a few singles come in. This guy told me he was waiting for a date, but who would make a date for Christmas Eve? He just sat there looking at his phone. Honestly, I think he just didn't want to be alone. His lover would put their arms around him, glad they had found someone so sensitive, yet so exquisitely groomed. Putting their fingers into Bearded Vest's large, but surprisingly soft, hands, they would lead him to the warmth of their marital bed. He looked at his watch again, 7:30. Clearly, she was standing him up. But what about her text? Why would she bother saying she was here and then going back for her ID? Why not just leave the text unanswered? He looked through the messages they'd exchanged on the app before switching to text. Yes, there was some solid flirting there in both directions, and she had seemed genuinely interested. What if she had planned to return, but something happened on the way there or back? Maybe a family emergency of some kind, but then she would at least have texted. But what if she couldn't text because she was the one with an emergency? Think about it. The streets were desolate, And there were still some industrial areas in this neighborhood with sinister figures lurking in the shadows. What if she had taken a shortcut to rush back to the bar and then been assaulted, knocked to the cold ground while the villains took her wallet? Or worse, shit. Should he go out and look for her? But he had no idea where she lived. Should he call for help? But he didn't even know her full name, just her phone number. It would probably be possible to get her identity from a phone number, but not without the police. He could call the police, but what would he tell them? Hey, this person I met online didn't show up for my date, and I'm worried something horrible has happened to her, so could you please go look for her? They wouldn't even take a missing person report until she'd been gone for 24 hours, and even then, the story would sound ridiculous. The thought of the police laughing at him began to calm him down. But what if she really is missing? Watts fretted, his fears rekindling. The first thing they'd do would be to check her phone records, to see who the last person she communicated with was. Me. I've been in this bar the whole time, but how would they know that? My phone location data. That would probably clear me. But I've heard phone location data isn't that precise, so if she was attacked somewhere nearby, they might still think it was me. Crap. Who could testify I was here the whole time? Bearded Vest. But would he remember me? Probably not. He sees hundreds of people every day. I need to do something to make myself memorable. Maybe I can ask him to take a selfie with me. The picture alone won't prove anything, but the awkwardness of the moment would make him remember my face and then connect it to my being here the whole night. Jesus, this is going to be embarrassing, but I guess it's what I need to do. Watts sighed, turned to look at the unsuspecting bartender, and felt his heart rate rise rapidly as he got up to approach him. Watts? A small voice asked from the other side of the table. He turned back to see a smiling, oval face the color of sand, surrounded by the fur fringe of an enormous puffer jacket. Kalina, he said, almost shouting in surprise. Oh, you must be so mad, she said, turning her body to make a quick escape, but with her eyes still locked onto his. No, don't go. I'm not mad at all. I'm just relieved. What happened? Watts made a rapid inventory of her features. Dark, narrow eyes extended into wings, a septum ring, a slender frame constantly in motion. Oh, it was Edgar, my hedgehog. Kalina looked down, but raised her eyes again to smile at him. Your hedgehog? Watts asked in genuine surprise. He's kind of a little shit, actually. She smiled briefly and turned her body away and back. When I got home, I saw his water was empty, and when I opened his cage to take it out and fill it, he made a break for it. Once he's hidden away, he's almost impossible to find, and so stupid he'll starve before giving up his little game. I had to keep eyes on him as I chased him around my apartment, and it took this long just to coax him back into his little house. Now that, Watts laughed, is not what I was expecting. Well, you said you were relieved, not angry. That's not what I was expecting either. Tell me, Watts, what were you relieved about? Did you think I was going to stand you up? No. Well, yes, actually, at first, but then I was worried something dreadful had happened to you. Something dreadful? How dark and exciting, she said, straddling the stool in front of him and swinging it closer as she pushed back the hood of her jacket. She put her elbows on the table, rested her face in her upturned hands, and smiled up at him, fluttering her eyes. Do tell. I love a good true crime story. Watts went through the entire progression of his thoughts, leaving no detail unturned. He had a vague sense that he might be oversharing, but she seemed to be entranced by his words. When he got to the selfie with the bartender, she laughed out loud, covering her mouth with one hand while reaching out to stroke his arm. A selfie with Bearded Vest? Oh, my poor dear, you must have been truly desperate. But now I kind of want you to take that selfie anyway, she said with a giggle. That's quite an imagination you have, mister. It's just my damned anxiety, Watts said, laughing as well, beginning to wonder if this adorable creature might actually be finding him interesting. My therapist calls it catastrophizing. Once my brain starts going, it's really hard for me to stop. How interesting, she said, squinting off to the side and pausing for a long moment. So much detail. The bartender's spouse, the police scanning my phone records. What if... Watts squirmed. Maybe she found him interesting, as in interesting mental patient, not interesting person I would want to date. Unable to hold the silence, he blurted out, "What if what?" Oh, she laughed. What if anxiety is your superpower? Wait, what? He said, genuinely mystified. Well, it's your anxiety that led you to have all these worries, right? Which turned into this incredibly rich story. What if the same part of your brain that makes you worry so much is the part that's able to weave those tales? Interesting, he said, pausing to look off to the side. I've never thought about it that way. I suppose you can't really worry if you can't come up with all the terrible things that might happen, right? Right, she said, smiling up at him. Have you ever thought about writing them down? My worries? Yes, well, maybe not all your worries, but at least the ones that turn into stories. 'Cause maybe, Kalina said, shimmying her shoulders towards him in a tiny dance, some of those stories will be about me. Maybe, he said, sharing in her smile. Preferably ones where I'm not getting hacked to bits by some ne'er-do-well. They both laughed. They spent the next hour talking, smiling, teasing, joking. At 9, Bearded Vest came over to tell them the bar was closing early for the holiday. They walked outside together, their breaths merging into a private fog in the still December air. Now, I really do want to see you again, and I want to hear more of your stories, she said. And I'm going to text you as soon as I get home so you'll know I haven't been the victim of a horrible murder. I would like that, Watts said, laughing. Wait, you would like a text? Or to see me again, she pouted. Both, he said, holding his arms out in an invitation. She jumped into him, holding him tightly until her puffer jacket had deflated against his body. Giggling, she spun around to walk briskly away, turning back once to smile and wave. A good sign. He headed towards the corner, seeing the bus pull up just in front of him. Another good sign. He boarded and found a pair of seats to himself. Pulling out his phone, he thought back to the beginning of the night, retracing his steps as he entered the bar, and began to write. What kind of fool makes a first date for Christmas Eve?
That's great. It's so funny. So our next reader is Carla Schaefer. And Carla, she writes poems addressing intersections of social justice, climate crisis, family and personal life with local and historical images. She is a one-person force for poetry in Bellingham, let me tell you. And she founded and led the Chuckanut Sandstone Writers Theater open mic. Well, she founded it in 1991, so, and it's still going, so do the math. And she co-founded the World Peace Poets. And she won the Writers International Network of Canada Empowered Poet and the Sue Boynton Walk Awards. So, and she believes in going to places and meeting the poets there. So she goes to a place, and I mean, I don't know, she goes to the open mics, I guess, and meets all the famous poets of the world, including in Ireland and Atlanta, Georgia, and who knows where else. Please welcome Carla Schaefer.
Thank you, Priscilla. That was wonderful. And it's wonderful to be part of the Jack Straw Writers for 2023. I've been around a while, and the poets that I look to and the writers for inspiration, many have died. When I was younger, there were still some alive, but this is a whole fresh, new way for me to live among writers and poets, even though I have the people at Chuckanut Sandstone to inspire me. This is better, so thank you. And Claudia Castro Luna, where are you, Claudia? Yes, thank you for your wonderful writing and all the places that it takes us, and for the work that you've done supporting the Jack Straw Writing Cultural Center. Good job. Sensations of place and time. Because my family has lived in the Northwest on stolen tribal lands since I was born, I listen to the bending of trees, follow paths of salmon, walk days, short in winter, long in summer. This is not the home of my ancestors. This is not Bohemia or Baden-Baden. It is not the Nebraska plains nor the Kansas prairies. I am not at the place my great-grandparents imagined. But their touches in my hand, their hopes carried in my heart, Their steps are known, just as the salmon wiggles a fin and in the sway of a cedar bough. My grandsons living near speak Japanese, the language of their mother's family, celebrate Children's Day, and imagine beyond borders and boundaries. My daughter's child speaks Hindi and Urdu, the language of her father's family, celebrates Eid ul-Fitr. Their paths of succession move through hazards in shadows and light. They view the stars across generations who have danced on the same side of the moon. Their ancestors move in their steps, in the twinkle of their eyes, beneath the flight of peregrine falcons, above waters where orcas swim. Learning to be who we are. Catch the heart off guard and blow it open, is a quote from Seamus Heaney. When I held my grandson asleep in my arms, I remembered 4 things. First was myself as a baby, wrapped in the tender weight of sleep. I recalled the warmth of being held and feeling the rise and fall of my mother's breathing. Then my son, who came first in the circle of my arms, his eyes closed, his breath an even flow in and out. How watching him sleep, I learned about quiet and release, about trust, tangible, defining who I needed to be for him. How later my daughter would yawn, turn her head when waking up, her eyes flickering open, little by little, in the nest of my arms, cozy and unquestioned a while longer, this peaceful time together, then our shared gaze before her smile. In such moments, my soul awakens, when the feathers fluff as the newborn soaks in warmth as if from sunlight, awakens like a hatchling's first flight out of the shadows. Caught off guard, I lean into this temperate place, forever holding to the true self within me. Memories for safekeeping. My mother next to me crying, telling me she was sad, but okay. My father's hands folded in prayer one day, the next down on his knees fixing a flat tire. My kids' first strong kicks aimed the soccer ball for a pass when they were 5, after they learned how to tie their shoestrings. Midnight in the barn, I pulled a lamb safely out of a struggling ewe's uterus. A long walk up the mountain to the source of Sauk River and how it flows to the sea, filling its part of the ocean. Connections between us, fragile as snowflakes, persistent as breath, broken by war, restored by peace. So this poem comes about partly because of Claudia and her family's story, but a lot of other people's stories. I've led a pretty straightforward middle-class life up in Skagit County, and for me to imagine peace and bring it out in my life isn't particularly difficult. But I think this poem helped me understand what I was working for better. Come in peace, with your shoulders forward pressed onto the next moment, ready to wipe away what is mean, death-spirited, or evil, to shrug one into a better place. Come in peace, because your brothers and sisters fought in wars, your father stolen at night, your mother beaten to the ground. Come in peace, when homemade or roadside bombs explode to flatten bodies, legs shattered, bones hanging by threads of flesh. Come in peace, because customs officers tossed your plastic toothbrush, hand-tooled wallet, worn-out hoodie into the trash, and sent you to detention, shipped back to somewhere, not your home. Come in peace, no matter how distant come in peace, no matter how distant the other holds you apart, makes you an enemy you've never been. New water rises into a future not yet lived. Smoke burning homes, vineyard, and forest dissipates. When sudden quiet arrives, your heartbeat strengthens, pulsates evenly again. A recovery of sorts leads to senses engaged, opens you to acceptance and peace and grace. Peace, shout it out, peace. Not a polite white-gloved peace, but the worker's glove, caked in mud. The kind of peace where you plod, pulling up broken plants, spread out their roots to grasp the soil into place, making a foothold for peace. So this poem was invented by Billy Collins as a joke. It's called a paradel, and he said that it was the 11th century French poets who created it as a love poem form. And there are 4 stanzas, and the first 3 each has, the first line is repeated, the second line, or the third line is repeated, and the 4th and 5th line is made up of the words from the first and the third lines. And each word is only used once. The last stanza takes the words from the stanzas above, and it only uses them once in the final stanza. So here it is. Ho Rainforest Memory. Ho Rainforest is on the Olympic Peninsula. Yes, sir. Ma'am, they. If you took off your mask, I would have remembered. Ho Rainforest Memory. We embrace beneath a canopy of cedar limbs. We embrace beneath a canopy of cedar limbs. Strands of sunlight gild a rubric on still ground. Strands of sunlight gild a rubric on still ground. Sunlight beneath the rubric of we, cedar, gild, limbs, a still canopy of strands embraced on ground. Touch presses heat between us where we lay. Touch presses heat between us where we lay. Our bed among frail Indian pipes. Our bed among frail Indian pipes. Heat presses among us and touch between Indian pipes where we lay our frail bed. You come a vaporous mantle breathed onto my skin. You come a vaporous mantle breathed onto my skin. Wrapping forest scent and you together in my arms. Wrapping forest scent and you together in my arms. My skin breathed together in you come, and the scent, a mantle wrapping you vaporous onto my forest arms. Heat, the skin of Indian pipes, and we embrace in sunlight mantle, where frail cedar wrapping a scent breathed onto vaporous arms beneath our bed. You gild among my limbs a rubric touch. Come, lay the forest canopy presses us still strands together on ground between my and you of we. Thank you, thank you.
So Billy Collins might have made that as a joke, but it made a good poem. So Brian Dong is a Vietnamese Chinese playwright, poet, teaching artist based in Duwamish territory, which is here. They're a proud resident playwright at Parley. Their artistic homes include Writers in the Schools and Art Corps. And for Brian, writing is an act of envisioning an eventual communing, an opportunity to freeze time as we know it, and a reaching for joy. Please welcome Brian Dong.
Okay. Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Priscilla, for bringing us all together. Thank you, Claudia, for introducing us. And gosh, thank you, Steve, for your love of music and sharing it with us. I loved the moment when you were doing all the instruments. And thank you, Sue, for that story. Yes. Very relatable. Also catastrophize on the daily. So, and thank you, Carla, for those wonderful poems and Carrie you brought to this place we live together in. I love the peninsula a lot. So, okay, great. And thank you, Jack Straw staff. Yay. Okay, I'm gonna read 7 poems. I'm going to read all the ones in the anthology, and then like a couple more. They're all poems related to my project that is inspired by my relationship to my family's language, in which I know how to speak it semi-fluently, but I don't know how to write it at all. So any translation done in these poems is also done through Microsoft Bing. So yeah. Okay, great. I'm gonna read this first poem that serves kind of as a introduction to the project. It's also the way I introduce myself to the Jack Straw Writers, so it also goes out to you in many ways. Okay, so this is To Whom It May Concern. I wish it didn't have to happen like this. The circumstances of my mouth are simply this. I do not have enough, so I'm sorry. My mouth is sorry, my tongue is sorry, I'm teeth sorry, I'm word sorry, I'm lip sorry, I have no excuses, sorry, I have nothing to say, sorry. I'm saying the wrong thing, sorry. I don't know how to say this, sorry. I wish I could tell you, sorry. There's so much you don't know, sorry. Like, what happened today? Sorry, this magical thing happened today. Sorry, it made me believe in a God. Sorry. You taught me how to pray. Sorry. But do you still believe in your gods? Sorry. Okay, that's that one. The next two I'm going to read are inspired by The Bride of Frankenstein. So that timestamp on that first poem, 36:11 to 44:28, refers to a specific scene in the movie in which Frankenstein, or the monster, LOL, the Frankenstein's monster gets kind of like an ESL lesson. There's this person teaching the monster, like, this is fire, it can be good. It can, but like, yeah, so, and then they get interrupted. So this is, look, it's the monster. It's so easy to mix up bathroom, seesaw, and key, saucy, in our language. I remember my frantic brother asking, where is the seesaw? And you didn't understand how a grown man wouldn't know where the bathroom was in his own home. When given the opportunity to explain myself, I don't. You've taught me what is good and what is bad. I forget which one I am. When I'm unsure, I keep my mouth empty. There isn't a second chance with fire or conversation. You burn or you don't. Okay. The next one is the second one that's inspired by The Bride of Frankenstein. It's a villanelle, which is related to the paradelle, which I didn't know until that little note that I read in Carla's poem in the anthology. And this is red envelopes. In our house, everything we say takes two turns. A dance in your mouth, and then a trip on my tongue. You'll speak of a tree, but I only know what burns. I swear it isn't that I don't want to learn. You thought I couldn't talk when I was young in our house. Everything we say takes. Two turns is plenty enough for a net of intention to return empty. Holding air and nothing else, a word dead and hung. You'll sing about a tree, but I won't hear. What burns in your heart when you feel it, the dreams that you yearn for. You've written them down on my gifts you've strung. In this house, nothing you write takes. Two turns around the sun ago, we wrote each other letters, concerns translated through Google. But somewhere among the tangled forest we wrote, I knew you meant it. That burns will blister, new skin protects, and we will earn new trust. The kind that cools and keeps in the lungs of this house. Everything we say takes two. If you turn into a tree, I'll learn what it takes to never burn. Okay. Okay. The next three poems I'm going to read are they're like varying lengths, but they'll go by. And they're inspired by my grandma. Okay. Dear Grandma, when I broke a mug and left it on my desk because it was a gift I didn't want to part with, you started to teach me a lesson. This is how you put a broken thing away. We threw away the unsalvageable shards. We wrapped up what was left with red paper. Then we put it away. Don't ever unwrap it. It isn't safe, and it's for good luck. Okay. And this one's inspired by my grandma, but it's also addressed to someone, a stranger that I ran into when I was eating ice cream in Port Townsend. Dear Shirley from Port Townsend, I picked up the cigarette that you dropped onto the beach. It's in my pencil case now. I started to climb down before I knew exactly which boulder it fell on. The clams kept squirting their water, which you pointed out to me, and the algae and spiribids on the rocks made me a little squeamish. But I found it. I wish I could give it to you. It has since fallen apart and released tobacco on all of my pens. I get embarrassed opening it sometimes. I wanted to say, since I feel like I said it insufficiently in person, that I hope you keep speaking in your native language to your grandson. I cannot recreate it in these English letters, and I only have a few educated guesses of which language it is based on the fact you also know French. But I want you to know that my iridescent soul, as you put it, feels like it has started to walk somewhere as you translated, "Come over here. Come on, come on." I sincerely hope that the hard things you shared with me become lighter to hold. I don't think they will ever go away, but I feel like holding it with others may be the only thing we can do when it is so cold. When I feel brave again, I think I will ask my grandma to walk on the beach with me sometime. Two more. This is Dear Loved Ones. I find wants to be complicated things. I want to stay. 我想留低. As it's being uttered, I already wonder if I've said the right thing. I wish you'd say, I want you to stay. Or you lay 留低. On the drive home, I forget to turn on my headlights. In a parallel universe, I destroy a family. In this one, I return to a room I was ready to leave. Curtains drawn, I undo the bed to crawl into it. I want you can be a literal translation of the Cantonese phrase, I love you, o oi le, as in, I want bread, o oi min bao, as in, you put your head on my shoulder as I'm scrubbing the pan, o oi le, as in, after a kiss on the forehead, o oi le, as in, we're in the car and I can't take my eyes off the road, but at least you're holding my hand, o oi le. However, if you're saying I want you, or you le, you would use a different word that is more like need. Soy you. I need to stay. Or soy you lei dai, lao dai. This word also sounds imperative, but I would argue it's not as demanding, as in, or soy you to paint my face yellow, as in, I soy you lei to hold my hand. I'm scared the wind makes me feel hollow. I soy you lei to stay because I'm confused when you leave. I soy you lei to feel like you're not leaving, but I can't help it. After I've left for good, my grandma tells me over the phone, I want you, o oi lei, to come over. That's what I want. It's easy to get dismissive when she says it like this. But what if she meant, I need you, o sui you lei, to come over. I love you, o oi lei, come over. This is my last poem. It's a love poem that has already made its way to my lover. So I am sharing it with the world. It also feels like Troy Osaki was a previous Jack Straw writer, I think, and he always ends his readings with a love poem, and I was like, oh, that's so good. So this is a love poem. Okay. Dear, I am an immigrant to you. I arrived at the nape of your neck. My papers were cleared, and you let me in through your mouth. I'm afraid of using my tongue. One wrong word can turn me into a trespasser. I travel through the small of your back to make a home. I practice a new language to learn how to touch you. I keep to my boundary and keep watch of yours. But so often, a look from you disappears the lines, and we lay down on a bed of our making, our minds chanting, no borders, no borders, no borders. Thank you.
Wow, what a reading. I mean, it's just, yay. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming and being here with us, and thank you to the people that are watching it streaming, of which there are hundreds. So, thank you.